It is my great pleasure to present the Hillman Prize for Opinion and Analysis to Adele Stan. The work that caught the judge's attention consisted of columns from the American Prospect, but we were also thinking about the distinguished career that led up to those pieces when we decided to honor Addie, as she goes by. The heart and soul of Addie's writing is her original reporting, whether she's writing about gender, class politics, religion, or race. Her work is suffused with a profoundly humane sensibility, a clear and urgent sense of justice, and a deep knowledge of history. Addie has been documenting the conservative movement since the early 90s. Over the course of her long career, she pioneered what it means for a lefty journalist to cover the right wing as a beat. Addie has never been afraid to tell her readers things we don't want to hear. She looked beyond the polls and the fancy models, big data, and made a persuasive argument for how Trump could win. In 2016, Addie called out Trump's behind-the-scenes alliance with the entities of the Koch network and correctly fingered Mike Pence as a likely running mate for Trump. She broke down the ways in which Trump's race-baiting and misogyny were working in his favor, including his courtship of white supremacists. Addie is notable for her dedication to her craft, as all of those who receive the Hillman tonight and have over the last many, many years. Her work ethic is extraordinary. Since 2015, she has been writing some 50 columns a year for the American Prospect. But even as she wrote the columns that caught the judge's attention, our attention, she was also holding down a full-time job as the editor of Clarion, the monthly newspaper of the City University of New York's Professional Staff Congress, a union in a final militant push to win a contract for CUNY professors that was 6 years overdue. In the sharp-edged, often mean-spirited world of political journalism, it's hard to name another writer so beloved by her colleagues as Addie. During her long career as a writer and editor, she has given back to her colleagues, serving as a mentor and confidant to other writers and a champion of new voices. Somehow, she's also found time to become an accomplished jazz vocalist and to nurture and sustain a community of DC jazz artists, just as she does her fellow journalists. And I think I saw on Twitter the other day somewhere that you've taken up the ukulele, a great, great instrument, undervalued. As her longtime friend, great columnist and journalist E.J. Graff remarked on learning of Addie's Hillman Prize, "Today we are all citizens of Adele Stan." Welcome.
Thank you to the Sidney Hillman Foundation for this great honor. Thank you, Katrina, for that introduction that has kind of taken my breath away. And I'm so overwhelmed considering the outstanding company I find myself in. I mean, it's just, these are extraordinary journalists, and I am just very humbled. And then there's the fact that I think this is the first prize I've won since 1965, when I was crowned Little Miss Liberty Park in Carteret, New Jersey. So you can imagine this came as quite a shock. And that this honor comes from an institution I so love and whose mission is journalism in the public good. And this event is just such a special thing. I mean, just take a minute and feel what it feels like in this room right now. And, you know, take a look around at the people in this room and in all the walks of life from which they come together in a common purpose. This is a special night every year. If it was a different time, I would talk about my family more and how we came to be middle class, thanks in part to contracts won by the CWA for the workers of a Western Electric factory in Kearney, New Jersey, where both of my grandfathers, all of their brothers, and my own father worked. And my grandmother, I would tell you, was a garment worker. And she lived to see her son get a master's degree. And his wife later get a master's degree. And, you know, that's quite an extraordinary story, but that happy story has to wait for another day. Because, sisters and brothers, we are at a moment. The forces of avarice and hatred are now at the very heart of our government, the most powerful government on earth. The fate of the republic truly does depend on us. And this beautiful, broad-based resistance that has come into view since November is a movement of many different groups fighting on many different fronts. Each of these fights must be fought on their own merits, of course. But make no mistake, taken together, the racism and xenophobia project, the sexism and queerphobia project, the anti-science project, the saber-rattling project, are all integral parts of a strategy to a larger goal. And the goal is plunder. Every resource of the nation is up for grabs, whether we're talking about the timber in the Bears Ears National Monument or the very well-being of our people with that purported health care bill, which is really just a massive tax cut for billionaires. The illness and death this would visit on the people, the plutocrats intend to spin this misery of others into gold for themselves. If they can get this, they will have succeeded by riding the winds of white rage over the election 8 years ago of the nation's first black president. Obamacare equals first black president. Repeal is his erasure. See how that works? The revocation and curtailment of the rights of racial and other minorities, as well as those of young women, is necessary to the Plunder Project as a means of marginalizing any opposition to the looting of the national commons, be it the treasury, the canyons, or the labor of the people. Even better for the plunderers is if they can pit these groups, the groups of the resistance, against each other. We cannot let them. And we cannot afford to help them do it, as we sometimes do when we fail to hold ourselves to account for the power dynamics in our own movement. Look to where the energy is. It's on the ground, just where it needs to be. Look at the leaders of the groups that are feeding the resistance. Many are people of color, many are women of color. Those of us of a certain era, perhaps of a certain demographic, who like to think of ourselves as leaders, we need to learn to follow. We must learn to listen. We need to look inside our institutions and ask, who holds the decision-making power inside this structure? Who is in a position of influence? Anyone from the communities targeted for attack? Anyone who looks like the people who organized the hundreds of thousands in the Women's March? Or the young people whose spirit animated the Bernie Sanders campaign? Or like the Native American water protectors of Standing Rock? Or the dreamers risking deportation by speaking out? Or the brilliant organizers of Black Lives Matter? The changes we must make cannot wait. We must not decide that each fight immediately in front of us is more urgent than the rebalancing and reconciliation necessary in our own movement, necessary to the survival of the overreaching cause of justice and fair representation. After all, this is the point of all that we do. After all, our chances of winning are hampered if we do not embody the very values that we fight for. But we're still trying to process that brutal campaign, one in which women of all colors were treated as dogs, worthy of kicking, and in which African Americans, American Muslims, and Latin American immigrants were strategically offered as objects of contempt, not worthy of human dignity. And within our own movement, the wounds of the primary season remain fresh. This is no small thing. We have work to do. So let's have those uncomfortable conversations about racism and sexism and transphobia and all of the other things amongst ourselves and in our institutions. Yes, even as we fight the plutocrats. Let us prepare for the battle knowing who we are, how we have succeeded and failed in the past, understanding the work that will make our organizations and institutions reflective of the coalition they aim to represent. Together, we can save the Republic, and we must. I have faith in us. I have faith in you. Accepting this prize in 2015, Jelani Cobb told us that another world is possible. Let us make it so. Thank you.